The debate began on a Tuesday morning in Geneva and spread across every human settlement in the galaxy within hours. The question was simple, but the implications were enormous. Should humanity leave the Galactic Council? Speaker Soman stood before the World Assembly, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was proposing. She had spent 3 weeks reviewing every report, every incident, every example of how the galaxy treated humanity. The evidence was overwhelming, but her conclusion surprised many. Yes, they have used us, Soman said to the packed chamber. Yes, they have taken advantage of our generosity. But we are better than them. That is exactly why we should stay. We do not abandon those in need simply because they fail to appreciate us. Our humanity is defined by how we treat others, not by how they treat us. The argument was compelling. Humanity had always prided itself on being different, on holding to higher standards even when others did not. To leave would be to admit that humans were no different from any other species, that they too would abandon others when convenient. But General Dongwu had a different perspective. He had retired from military service 3 months ago after the Vorden War. He had commanded the Fifth Fleet and watched 6,000 of his people die in battles that should never have been theirs to fight. When he spoke to the assembly, his voice carried the weight of those losses. "We have given 3 generations to the galaxy," Dongwu said. "My grandfather helped build the first human settlements outside Earth. My father designed defense systems for council stations. I led fleets into battle for worlds that were not our own. And my daughter?" He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "My daughter died at 23 years old, in a battle protecting a council world that had voted against providing aid to human colonies just 6 months earlier. Tell me, when do we matter? When do our children get to live in peace?" The assembly chamber was silent. Everyone knew about the vote Dongwu referenced. Titan Colony had suffered a catastrophic meteor strike, and the council had debated for 3 weeks whether to provide emergency aid. In the end, they voted against it, citing budget concerns. Human resources had been stretched thin repairing the damage without outside help. Dr. Jiwan spoke next. She was the physicist whose fusion reactor designs powered half the galaxy. The theft of her research had made headlines across human space. When she approached the podium, people leaned forward to listen. "I saved an entire civilization," Jiwan began quietly. "The Krithians would be extinct without the stellar array I designed. It took 3 years of my life and cost Earth's government 40 billion credits. We did it because it was the right thing to do." "And how did the Krithians thank us?" She pulled up a display showing the council voting record. "When Jakarta Station suffered a containment breach, 1,700 humans died while we waited for emergency response teams. The Krithians voted against providing aid because it was not economically justified. The same people whose son I saved decided that human lives were not worth the cost of sending a rescue ship." Jiwan looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the session across human space. "I am done. I will never work for the galaxy again. They do not deserve what we give them." The debate raged for 6 months. Every news channel, every social media platform, every university and workplace became a forum for discussing humanity's future. Arguments grew heated. Families divided over the question. Some saw leaving as abandonment of responsibility. Others saw staying as acceptance of abuse. Myung, the engineer who built the quantum relay network, published an article that went viral across human space. In it, she described the last 15 years of her life. How she had worked endless hours maintaining and improving the network. How council technicians blamed her for every malfunction, even those caused by their own incompetence. How she had missed her father's funeral because she was fixing a relay that a Thoraxian operator had damaged through negligence. "They do not see me as a person," Myung wrote. "They see me as a tool that fixes their problems. When a tool breaks, you replace it. But I am not a tool. I am a human being who sacrificed everything for people who would not cross the street to help me." Dr. Taeyang, who had saved the Velkari from extinction, remained silent during most of the debate. But 2 weeks before the referendum vote, he released a short statement that changed many minds. "I would save them again," Taeyang wrote. "Even knowing what I know now, even understanding how little they value human life, I would still cure that plague. Because that is who we are. But there is a difference between helping others and letting them destroy you. The galaxy has become dependent on us not because we are the only ones capable of solving problems, but because we are the only ones willing to sacrifice everything to do so. They need to learn to help themselves." And we need to learn that saving ourselves is not selfish. As the referendum date approached, polls showed the vote would be close. But then came the incident on Harmony Station. Harmony Station was a human-built research facility in neutral space, jointly operated by 5 species, including humans. A fire broke out in the lower decks due to faulty wiring installed by a Thoraxian contractor. The human crew immediately initiated emergency protocols and began evacuating the station. Captain Borum commanded the evacuation. She ensured that all personnel, regardless of species, got to the escape pods. When it became clear there were not enough pods for everyone, she and 7 other humans stayed behind to buy time for the others to escape. They manually contained the fire, preventing it from spreading to the docking bay where the evacuation was happening. All 8 humans died when the containment failed, but their sacrifice saved 237 lives from 5 different species. The Council sent official condolences. They praised the humans for their bravery and sacrifice. Then they argued about who should pay for the station repairs for 3 weeks before deciding to split the cost among member species. Humanity's share was calculated at 30%. Despite humans representing less than 8% of the station's personnel, when the bill arrived, something broke in the collective consciousness of humanity. These 8 people had died saving others, and the response was to charge their species for the privilege. The referendum was held the following week. Polling stations opened across Earth, Mars, the lunar colonies, Titan, and hundreds of settlements scattered across human space. Every citizen over the age of 16 was eligible to vote. The question on the ballot was simple. Should humanity withdraw from the Galactic Council and cease all cooperative agreements with galactic civilization? Yes or no? Hyunwoo voted early in the morning at a polling station near his apartment on Earth. He had taken leave from his position as ambassador to be present for the vote. As he marked his ballot, he thought about the last 7 years of his life. The meetings, the negotiations, the constant battle to get the Council to take human concerns seriously. He thought about all the reports of exploitation and abuse he had filed, most of which had been dismissed or ignored. He voted yes. The voting continued for 18 hours to accommodate all the time zones and distant colonies. When the polls closed, the counting began. Results came in slowly from the outer settlements, transmitted across vast distances. The world watched and waited. At midnight Geneva time, the final results were announced. 73% of humanity had voted to leave the Galactic Council. The margin was not even close. Hyunwoo stood in his apartment watching the results come in. His phone rang continuously with calls from council delegates, from reporters, from human officials asking what happened next. He ignored them all. Instead, he composed a speech that he would deliver to the council in the morning. He wrote for 4 hours, deleting and rewriting, trying to find words that would explain what humanity had decided and why. In the end, he kept it simple and honest. No diplomatic language, no carefully crafted phrases designed to avoid offense. Just the truth. At dawn, Hyunwoo sent the speech to Ambassador Hyejin, his deputy, who would deliver it to the council while he remained on Earth. He included a personal note. Make sure they understand this is final. We are not negotiating. We are informing them of our decision. Hyejin stood before the Galactic Council at noon the next day. The chamber was packed. Every delegate was present, along with hundreds of observers and journalists. The mood was tense. Rumors of the vote had spread, but many still believed humanity was bluffing. Hyejin read the speech Hyunwoo had written. She spoke for 20 minutes, detailing every incident, every betrayal, every example of how humanity had been exploited. She listed the names of humans who had died helping the galaxy. She showed the voting records where council species had refused to help humans in need. She ended with these words. We came to you with open hands and open hearts. You taught us that kindness is weakness and generosity is stupidity. You have our answer now. Humanity is leaving. You have 6 months to make other arrangements. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Some delegates shouted denials. Others made threats. A few sat in stunned silence. The council president called for order, but it took several minutes to restore calm. Then the president spoke, and his words revealed everything wrong with how the galaxy saw humanity. This is ridiculous, he said, almost laughing. The morning light filtered through the massive windows of the Galactic Council chamber, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Hyunwoo stood at the speaking platform. his dark suit contrasting with the colorful robes and biological variations of the other delegates around him. He had been Earth's ambassador for 7 years now, and he still felt a surge of pride every time he entered this room. 300 years had passed since humanity first reached the stars and found they were not alone. The discovery had changed everything. 57 different species made up the Galactic Council, each bringing their own culture, technology, and perspective to the grand experiment of interstellar cooperation. Humanity had been the newest members, arriving with primitive fusion drives and wide-eyed wonder at the vastness of galactic civilization. But humanity had not arrived empty-handed. They brought something the galaxy desperately needed, though no one had realized it at the time. They brought relentless determination and an inexplicable drive to solve problems that seemed impossible. Mi-young had been the first to make a real impact. She was just 26 years old when she designed the quantum relay network that now connected over 10,000 worlds. Before her breakthrough, communication between distant sectors took weeks or months. Messages crawled through space at light speed, making any kind of coordinated civilization nearly impossible. Mi-young changed that. Her relays created instantaneous communication across the entire galaxy. She had worked for 3 years straight, barely sleeping, driven by a vision that others called impossible. The day the network went live, Mi-young stood in the control center on Nexus Prime Station and watched as worlds that had been isolated for millennia suddenly connected. She cried when the first messages started flowing through the system. Hyunwoo remembered her words from the press conference that followed. "My grandmother lived in a small village in Korea," Mi-young had said. "She told me stories about how isolated they felt before the internet connected the world. I just did the same thing, but bigger. Nobody should feel alone in this universe." The galaxy had celebrated her achievement. They gave her awards and recognition. Then they immediately started demanding upgrades, expansions, and modifications. Mi-young spent the next decade maintaining and improving the network, rarely seeing Earth, working endlessly to keep the galaxy connected. Then there was Dr. Taeyang and the Valkyrie plague. The Valkyrie were an old species, proud of their long history and cultural achievements. When a genetic disease began killing their population, they tried every solution their best scientists could develop. Nothing worked. The plague was specifically designed to attack their unique DNA structure, spreading faster than they could contain it. The Valkyrie asked the Council for help. Most species sent condolences, but little else. The problem was too complex, too specific to Valkyrie biology. It would take decades of research with no guarantee of success. Most species decided it was not worth the investment. Taeyang heard about the crisis during a medical conference. He was a geneticist from Busan, specializing in adaptive DNA repair mechanisms. He read the Valkyrie reports and immediately requested emergency leave from his position at the Lunar Medical Institute. Within a week, he had assembled a team of 40 human doctors and researchers. They traveled to the Valkyrie homeworld and set up a research facility in an abandoned warehouse. For 18 months, Taeyang and his team worked around the clock. They slept in shifts, ate at their workstations, and pushed themselves beyond any reasonable limit. The Valkyrie watched these strange humans work with desperate hope. Taeyang lost 15 kilos during those months. His hair turned gray, but he never stopped. When the cure was finally synthesized, Taeyang was so exhausted he collapsed immediately after confirming the results. He woke up 3 days later in a Valkyrie hospital, surrounded by grateful families who called him a savior. The Valkyrie population survived because one human doctor decided their lives were worth 18 months of hell. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. When the Crithian sun began dying prematurely, threatening to destroy their entire civilization within a century, the Council formed committees and study groups. They talked and debated and wrote reports. Meanwhile, a human astrophysicist named Nari simply got to work. Nari was 34 years old and had been studying stellar mechanics since she was a teenager. She looked at the Crithian sun and saw a problem with a solution. It took her 3 years to design the Stellar Stabilization Array, a massive network of satellites that would regulate the sun's fusion processes and extend its life by 10,000 years. The engineering challenges were enormous. The cost was astronomical, but Nari convinced Earth's government to fund the project. "We have the knowledge and the resources," she told the World Assembly. "They have a dying sun and 3 billion people who will lose their home. How can we not help?" The array was built and deployed. The Crithian sun stabilized. 3 billion lives were saved. The Crithians held celebrations across their world, thanking the genius human who had given them a future. Then they went back to their lives, and Nari went back to her research expecting nothing in return. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not just technology or medicine or scientific breakthroughs, but something more fundamental. Humans saw problems and could not rest until they were solved. They saw people suffering and felt compelled to help. Other species admired humanity's achievements. They praised human innovation and determination. But they never quite understood the cost. Hyunwoo thought about this as he stood in the council chamber that morning. He had just received a report from the Outer Rim territories. Human engineers were maintaining life support systems on 47 stations. Human doctors staffed emergency medical facilities on 15 worlds. Human teachers were training the next generation of scientists from a dozen different species. Human cargo ships delivered food, medicine, and supplies to hundreds of colonies. Everywhere Hyunwoo looked, he saw humanity's fingerprints on galactic civilization. The Council had come to depend on human expertise for everything from infrastructure maintenance to crisis response. And humans kept giving, kept helping, kept solving problems because that was what humans did. But lately, Hyunwoo had noticed something troubling. The gratitude was fading. The requests were becoming demands. When human colonies needed assistance, the Council voted to study the matter further. When human companies sought fair trade agreements, they faced bureaucratic delays that mysteriously never affected other species. Jiwon had noticed it too. She was a physicist who had designed the clean fusion reactors that now powered entire sectors of the galaxy. Last month, she had watched the Council seize her latest research under emergency powers, citing galactic security. 2 weeks later, a Thoraxian corporation announced they had developed the same technology independently. The patent belonged to them now. Hyunwoo tried to bring the issue to the Council, but his concerns were dismissed. The Council president, a tall being covered in blue scales, had smiled at him with what might have been sympathy. "Ambassador, humanity has given much to the galaxy. We are grateful. But you must understand that the Council represents the interests of all species. Sometimes individual concerns must yield to the greater good." Hyunwoo had nodded politely and left the chamber, but the president's words echoed in his mind. Humanity always yielded for the greater good. The question was becoming clear. When would the greater good include humanity's interests? As he walked back to the human embassy that evening, Hyunwoo looked up at the stars through the station's transparent ceiling. Somewhere out there, human ships were rushing to emergencies. Human doctors were saving lives, and human engineers were keeping the lights on. All of it taken for granted, all of it expected. He made a mental note to call Earth that night. Some conversations needed to start happening, and they needed to happen soon. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of his cargo vessel, the Steadfast staring at the emergency transmission that had just arrived. His jaw clenched as he read the orders for the third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. He had been a merchant captain for 12 years, running supply routes between human colonies and distant outposts. The Steadfast was not a military vessel, just a reliable cargo hauler with a crew of 32. Right now his hold was filled with medical supplies desperately needed on Gangnam Colony, where a bacterial infection had spread through the water system. 200 people were sick and 12 had already died. The Council transmission was clear. He was ordered to divert immediately to the Nexus Prime system to deliver luxury goods to Councillor Vexith's private estate. The goods were already loaded on a transport waiting at the way station. Failure to comply would result in the suspension of his trade license and sanctions against all human merchant vessels in the sector. Minho called down to the medical bay where Dr. Hana was inventorying the supplies. She was coming along specifically to help treat the sick when they arrived at Gangnam. "We have a problem," Minho said when she answered. 20 minutes later, Hana stood on the bridge, her face pale with anger. "You cannot be serious. People are dying. Children are dying." "I know," Minho said quietly. "But if I refuse, they will blacklist every human ship in this sector. No trade means no medical supplies for any of our colonies, not just Gangnam. This is insane. What luxury goods are so important that they are worth human lives?" Minho pulled up the cargo manifest. Hana read it in silence. "Decorative crystals, Imported wine from a distant world, handcrafted furniture, art pieces, nothing essential, nothing urgent, just expensive items for a council member who wanted them delivered immediately. Hana slammed her hand on the console. This is not right. This is not what we signed up for. But Minho had already made his decision. He changed course for Nexus Prime. The supplies reached Gangnam Colony 4 days late. By then the death count had risen to 31. Among the dead were 2 children under the age of 5. Minho attended the memorial service via video link from his ship. He said nothing about the delay or the reason for it. But he sent a detailed report to Ambassador Hyunwoo that same night. Scientist Yoonji had her own breaking point. She had spent 8 years developing a revolutionary clean energy system that could generate power from ambient cosmic radiation. It was free, unlimited energy that any civilization could harvest with the right technology. She had planned to publish her research openly, allowing all species to benefit from it. The Council had other ideas. They classified her research under emergency powers, citing concerns about potential weapons applications. Yoonji protested loudly. Her technology could not be weaponized. It was purely for power generation. But the Council refused to listen. Her laboratory was sealed, her data was confiscated, and she was forbidden from discussing her work with anyone. 3 months later, the Thoraxian Science Consortium announced a major breakthrough in clean energy technology. Their press release described a system that sounded identical to Yoonji's research. They had filed patents across the galaxy, claiming exclusive rights to the technology. When Yoonji filed a complaint, the Council Review Board dismissed it, citing insufficient evidence of prior work. Her confiscated data was, conveniently, classified and therefore could not be used to support her claim. Yoonji quit her position at the Council Research Institute the next day. She returned to Earth and never worked on another project for the galactic community. When reporters asked why, she gave them a tired smile. Why would I? So they can steal it again? But the real breaking point came with the Vordan crisis. The Vordan were a militaristic species from the far edge of the galaxy. They had refused all contact with the Council for centuries, preferring isolation. Then, without warning or explanation, Vordan fleets began attacking outlying systems. They hit fast and hard, destroying stations and colonies before anyone could respond. The Council declared a state of emergency. Defense fleets were mobilized across the galaxy. And then came the deployment orders. Commander Jiho received his orders at 300 hours. The 3rd Human Fleet was to deploy immediately to the front lines in the Outer Rim. They would engage the Vordan advance forces and hold the line while other Council fleets moved into defensive positions around core worlds. Jiho was a career military officer who had served humanity for 28 years. He knew what the orders meant. The 3rd Fleet would be facing the Vordan with minimal support, buying time with their lives so that Council worlds could fortify their defenses. It was a suicide mission dressed up as a tactical deployment, but orders were orders. The 3rd Fleet deployed within 12 hours. Jiho led 15,000 human soldiers into battle against an enemy they barely understood. The fighting was brutal. Vordan ships were heavily armed, and their crews fought with a ferocity that shocked even experienced combat veterans. The 3rd Fleet held the line for 6 weeks. They won some battles and lost others. Slowly, they pushed the Vordan back, paying for every kilometer of space with blood and sacrifice. Other Council fleets remained in defensive positions, protecting their homeworlds while humans died in distant battles. When the war finally ended after 8 months of fighting, 70,000 human soldiers were dead. The 3rd Fleet had been reduced to a quarter of its original strength. Commander Jiho had watched ships under his command torn apart, had given orders that sent thousands to their deaths, had lost friends he had known for decades. The victory celebration was held on Nexus Prime. The Council chamber was filled with delegates praising the courage and sacrifice of the defense forces. Admiral Thexrin of the Thoraxian Fleet received the highest military honor for his strategic brilliance in organizing the defense. His fleet had engaged the Vordan exactly twice during the entire war, both times in minor skirmishes. Jiho was there too, standing in the back with the other human officers. They watched the ceremony in silence. When someone mentioned the human casualties, the Council President nodded solemnly and called them regrettable but necessary losses for the greater good. Jiho left the ceremony early. He returned to his quarters and wrote a long message to his family on Earth. At the end, he added a line that surprised even himself. "I do not think I can do this anymore. I do not think any of us should." The message was intercepted and flagged by Council security monitors, not because of any security concern, but because similar messages were being sent by hundreds of humans across the galaxy, captains like Minho, scientists like Yunji, soldiers like Jiho, teachers, engineers, doctors, and diplomats, all of them reaching the same conclusion at roughly the same time. This was not partnership. This was exploitation. Ambassador Hyunwoo had been receiving reports for months. Individual incidents had seemed like isolated problems. The pattern was only visible when he looked at everything together. Humans were being used. Their contributions taken for granted, their concerns dismissed. When humans needed help, the Council found excuses. When the Council needed help, humans were expected to drop everything and provide it. The memorial service for the war dead was held on Earth, in the fields outside New Seoul. 70,000 names were carved into stone monuments. Families came from across human space to mourn their losses. Jiho stood at attention as the names were read aloud, a process that took 6 hours. Hyunwoo attended the service and walked among the mourning families afterward. He listened to their stories. A mother who lost her son. A wife who lost her husband. Children who would grow up without parents. All of them sacrificed for a galaxy that barely acknowledged their loss. That night, Hyunwoo returned to his apartment and composed a message to Earth's World Assembly. It was encrypted with the highest security protocols and marked for immediate attention of the Secretary General. The message was brief. "We need to have a serious conversation about humanity's place in the galaxy. I do not think we can continue like this. We need to discuss our options, including the option to leave." He sent the message and sat in the darkness of his apartment, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were still working, still helping, still sacrificing. The question was no longer whether they should continue. The question was how much longer they could afford to. "Humanity will not really leave. You need us as much as we need the first ships left within 48 hours of the referendum results." They were small vessels, personal transports carrying human families from Council stations back toward human space. Then came the larger ships, research vessels, medical ships, cargo haulers. Within a week, the exodus had become a flood. Dr. Taeyang packed his laboratory on the Valkyrie homeworld with careful precision. He had spent nearly 2 decades here, first curing the plague and then staying to help rebuild their medical infrastructure. The Valkyrie who worked with him watched in growing panic as he boxed up equipment and sealed data storage units. "You cannot leave," said Velrin, his chief assistant. "We still need you. There is so much work unfinished." Taeyang looked at her with genuine sadness. "I taught you everything I know. You have 15 trained doctors who can continue the work. You do not need me. You just got comfortable having me solve your problems. But the new research protocols, the genetic database, the treatment plans for the upcoming mutation cycle are all documented and available to you," Taeyang interrupted gently. "Velrin, you are an excellent doctor. You are capable of handling all of this. You just need to believe in yourself instead of depending on me." The Valkyrie government tried to intervene. They offered Taeyang a permanent position with unlimited funding. They promised him a seat on their scientific council. They suggested that Earth's vote did not apply to individuals who wished to stay. Taeyang politely declined everything. "I am going home," he said simply. "I have given you 2 decades. Now I want to see my grandchildren grow up." His ship departed on a Tuesday morning. Half the medical staff came to see him off, many of them crying. Taeyang waved from the viewport and felt nothing but relief as the Valkyrie homeworld shrank behind him. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Myung shut down the quantum relay network sector by sector, removing human access codes and locking out the control systems. She left detailed instructions for maintenance, but she knew the instructions were useless. The technology was too complex, too dependent on understanding principles that took years to master. Council technicians would keep the system running for a while, but without humans to handle the inevitable problems, the network would eventually fail. A Thoraxian official tried to stop her at Nexus Prime Station. He demanded she hand over the full technical specifications and override codes. Myung looked at him with cold amusement. "I spent 12 years building this network. Every relay, every node, every safety protocol came from my mind and my work. You took it for granted every single day. Now you want me to give you the keys so you can keep taking it for granted? She shook her head. Figure it out yourself. You are smart people. I am sure you can manage. The official threatened legal action. Myung laughed. I am leaving your jurisdiction in 6 hours. Sue me if you want, but I will not be here to receive the paperwork. She left Nexus Prime on schedule, and within days the first relay malfunctions began appearing. Response times increased. Data packets got corrupted. Communication became unreliable. Council technicians worked frantically to fix problems they barely understood. Captain Minho and his crew voted unanimously to return to human space. The Steadfast was 3 days from Nexus Prime when the orders came through. The Council demanded he complete his current supply run and accept reassignment to emergency relief duties. There was a humanitarian crisis developing in the Outer Rim, and cargo vessels were needed. Minho read the orders twice, then deleted them. He changed course for Earth and never looked back. Across the galaxy, 15,000 human merchant vessels did the same. Trade routes that had functioned for centuries suddenly stopped working. Supplies stopped flowing. Colonies that had depended on regular deliveries found their stockpiles running low. The Council issued threats, then sanctions, then desperate pleas. All were ignored. Humans had made their decision, and no amount of pressure or persuasion would change it. The most devastating exodus came from the technology sector. Engineer Yuna led the systematic dismantling of human-built infrastructure across the galaxy. She had a team of 300 specialists who traveled from station to station, shutting down systems and removing human technology. Fusion reactors were taken offline properly, preventing meltdowns but leaving stations without power. Communication hubs were shut down and locked. Medical equipment was deactivated. Manufacturing facilities were mothballed. Everywhere Yuna's team went, they left darkness and silence in their wake. A Thoraxian administrator confronted her at Arcturus Station. You are sabotaging critical infrastructure. This is an act of war. Yuna pulled up the legal documents on her tablet. This fusion reactor was built with human funding, using human technology and maintained by human engineers. It belongs to us. We are taking it offline and removing our property. Everything we are doing is completely legal according to the treaties your people insisted on. But thousands of people depend on this reactor for power. Then you should have treated us better, Yuna said without sympathy. You had 300 years to learn how to maintain your own infrastructure. We gave you the keys to paradise and you never appreciated it. Now you can remember what darkness feels like. She finished the shutdown procedure and moved to the next station. Behind her, Arcturus went dark for the first time in 2 centuries, but the most painful blow came from researcher Kyungmin. He was 73 years old and had spent 30 years developing the Cascade Theorem, a mathematical framework that underpinned virtually all modern galactic technology. His equations made faster-than-light communication possible. His calculations enabled stable fusion reactions. His theories formed the foundation for everything from medical scanners to terraforming technology. Kyungmin had planned to publish his complete work on his 75th birthday, as a gift to the galaxy. That was before the referendum. Council scientists begged him to reconsider. His work was too important to be lost. Surely he understood that his research transcended politics. The head of the Galactic Science Institute traveled to Earth personally to meet with him. Professor Kyungmin, please. Your Cascade Theorem is the cornerstone of modern civilization. You cannot take it away. Kyungmin sat in his office at Seoul National University, looking at the distinguished council scientist with tired eyes. I can and I will. This is my life's work. It exists in my mind and in my personal files. I published the basic framework years ago, which you all use freely, but the complete theorem, the full equations that make everything work properly, those are mine. But think of all the species who will suffer without it. Medical technology will regress. Communication will fail. Entire sectors will collapse. Yes, Kyungmin said quietly. They will. And maybe that will teach you what we were worth. You wanted my knowledge. You never wanted me. There is a difference. We can offer you anything. Name your price. Any position, any resources, any recognition you desire. Kyungmin smiled sadly. I do not want anything from you. I want to spend my remaining years teaching students who appreciate learning. I want to publish papers that will benefit humanity. I want to die knowing that my work helped people who valued it. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You can show yourself out. The Council scientist left Earth empty-handed. Within weeks, technology across the galaxy began to fail, as the underlying principles became unclear. Engineers could maintain existing systems for a while, but they could not develop new ones. They could not fix fundamental problems. They had built their entire civilization on foundations they did not truly understand, and now those foundations were crumbling. The galaxy watched in growing horror as the lights literally went out across civilized space. Stations lost power, communication networks fragmented, transportation slowed to pre-contact speeds. Medical facilities could not treat complex diseases. Manufacturing ground to a halt. Within 5 months, it became clear that human innovation had not just improved galactic civilization. It had become the foundation of it. Humans had been the ones who kept everything running, who solved the unsolvable problems, who pushed technology forward. Without them, the galaxy began to fail. The Council held emergency sessions. They debated and argued and formed committees. Some wanted to force humans to return through military action. Others suggested negotiation, offering concessions and promises. A few understood that it was too late, that humanity had made their choice and would not reverse it. Ambassador Hyun-woo received delegation after delegation at Earth's orbital station. Every Council species sent representatives, all with the same message: come back. We need you. We will do better. Hyun-woo listened politely to each one. Then he gave them all the same answer. You had 300 years to treat us as equals. You chose to treat us as tools. Now you can learn to fix your own problems. We are done. The final human ships left Council space on schedule 6 months after the referendum. Behind them, they left darkness, silence, and a galaxy that finally understood what it had lost. But it was too late. Humanity had closed the door, and this time it would not be opened again. The first real crisis hit the Outer Rim 3 weeks after the last human ships departed. Station Director Kalek sat in his office on Terminus Station, watching the power levels drop on every monitor. The fusion reactor was failing, and none of his engineering staff knew how to fix it. How long until complete shutdown? He asked his chief engineer. 6 hours, maybe 8 if we reduce consumption to life support only. And you cannot repair it? The engineer, a Thoraxian who had worked alongside human technicians for years, shook his head miserably. I can follow basic maintenance procedures, but this is not a maintenance issue. The reactor is experiencing cascade failures in the magnetic containment system. I do not understand the underlying principles well enough to fix it. Kalex knew what that meant. The human engineer who had maintained this reactor had tried to train local staff before leaving. But 3 months of training could not replace 15 years of experience and deep understanding of the technology. When the human left, he had taken his expertise with him. Contact the other stations. See if anyone has a qualified engineer who can help. But every station in the sector was experiencing similar problems. One by one, over the next 2 weeks, 100 stations lost power. Emergency protocols kicked in, evacuating populations to nearby worlds. But the evacuation itself created new problems. Ships broke down, navigation systems failed. Colonies that received evacuees found their own resources stretched beyond capacity. Within a month, 12 stations were completely abandoned, floating dark and lifeless in the void. 20 more operated at minimal capacity, barely able to support their remaining populations. The Outer Rim, once a thriving frontier region, became a zone of crisis and desperation. The Council mobilized emergency response teams, but they quickly discovered that the crisis was far more widespread than anyone had realized. The problems cascading through the Outer Rim were just the beginning. On the Velkari homeworld, Dr. Velrin stood in the genetics laboratory that Taeyang had built, staring at results she did not understand. A new pathogen had emerged, similar to but distinct from the plague that had nearly destroyed their species decades ago. She had the treatment protocols Taeyang had left behind. She had years of training under his guidance. But the pathogen was mutating in unexpected ways, and she did not know how to adapt the treatment. She called a meeting of the medical council. 20 doctors gathered, all trained by humans, all competent in their fields. They reviewed the data and discussed options. But without Taeyang's intuitive understanding of genetic systems, without his ability to see patterns that others missed, they were just guessing. We need to try the modified treatment protocol, Velrin finally decided. It is our best option. They deployed the treatment across the infected population. For 3 days, it seemed to work. Then the pathogen adapted. The treatment not only stopped working, but actually made the infection more aggressive. What had been a manageable outbreak became a pandemic. Within a week, 100,000 Velkari were infected. Within a month, the number reached 5 million. The medical system, built and trained by humans but now running without them, simply could not handle the crisis. Doctors did their best, but their best was not enough. Not without the human expertise that had saved them before. Velrin sent desperate messages to Earth, begging Taeyang to return, even just to consult remotely. The messages went unanswered. Not because Taeyang was cruel, but because he never received them. Earth had closed its borders to all Council communication except official diplomatic channels. And the Council had no diplomatic relationship with humanity anymore. The Velkari population began to die. Slowly at first, then faster. 4 months into the pandemic, the death toll reached 2 million. 8 months in, it was 4 million. The Velkari government issued emergency declarations. They imposed quarantines. They tried everything they could think of. Nothing worked. In the end, 40% of the Velkari population died before the pathogen finally burned itself out, having killed everyone susceptible to it. The survivors were left with a broken society, and the bitter knowledge that they could have been saved if only they had valued the humans who had saved them before. The Thoraxian economy collapsed next. Their entire technology sector had been built on reverse-engineered human designs and stolen research. They had patents on hundreds of innovations they barely understood. When their systems began breaking down, they discovered that patents were useless without the knowledge to implement and maintain the technology. Factories shut down because nobody could repair the automated systems. Transportation networks failed because the control algorithms stopped working properly. Their vaunted research institutes produced no new breakthroughs because they had never learned to innovate, only to copy. Unemployment reached 30% within 6 months. Social unrest followed. The Thoraxian government tried to maintain order, but they were dealing with problems on every front. Power shortages, food distribution failures, medical system breakdowns. Every sector of their society had been dependent on human technology, and all of it was failing simultaneously. Counselor Thexera of the Crethians watched all of this with growing dread. Her world had been saved by Nari's stellar stabilization array. The array was still functioning, keeping their sun stable and giving them the 10,000 years of life they had been promised. But lately the array had been showing minor anomalies, small fluctuations in the sun's output. Nothing dangerous yet, but worrying. Thexera called in her best astrophysicists. "Can we maintain the array ourselves?" The lead scientist was honest. "We can monitor it. We can perform basic maintenance on the satellite network. But if anything goes seriously wrong with the core systems, we do not have the expertise to fix it. The human who designed this was a genius. We are competent professionals. There is a difference. How long before something goes seriously wrong? Could be decades. Could be next year. The array was designed to be self-maintaining, but no system is perfect. Eventually, something will fail." Thexera understood what that meant. Their entire civilization was living on borrowed time, dependent on technology they could not fully maintain. One major failure, and 3 billion Crithians would die as their sun destabilized. She drafted a motion to the council, proposing that they formally apologize to humanity and request their return. The motion failed. Pride in politics prevented most species from admitting they had been wrong. They preferred to believe they could solve their problems without human help, but the problems kept multiplying. The quantum relay network that Myung had built began experiencing serious failures. Communication between sectors became unreliable, then sporadic, then nearly impossible. The galaxy, which had been unified by instant communication for 2 centuries, fragmented into isolated regions again. Trade collapsed. Without reliable communication and with merchant ships breaking down, interstellar commerce became impossible. Worlds that had specialized in specific industries depending on trade for everything else faced shortages of basic necessities. Food, medicine, manufactured goods, everything became scarce. Some worlds tried to become self-sufficient, but they lacked the technology and expertise. Terraforming systems failed, making some colonies unlivable. Life support systems on stations broke down. Agricultural technology stopped working properly. The death toll began rising across the entire galaxy, not from war or disaster, but from the slow collapse of the infrastructure that had sustained civilization. Millions died from preventable diseases. Millions more from starvation or environmental system failures. Some died in accidents when safety systems failed. Others died in riots and conflicts over scarce resources. The council held emergency session after emergency session. They formed committees and task forces. They hired consultants and researchers. They threw money and resources at every problem. Nothing worked. You could not buy expertise that did not exist. You could not hire engineers when nobody understood the engineering principles. Some species began to understand. The Velkari, devastated by the plague, were the first to publicly acknowledge their mistake. Their representatives stood before the council and spoke words that needed to be said. We are dying because we were fools. The humans saved us once and we repaid them with indifference and exploitation. Now we are paying the price for our arrogance. We took their gifts and gave nothing in return. We treated them as tools and wondered why they left. This collapse is not humanity's fault. It is ours. Other species slowly came to the same realization, but by then it was too late. Earth's borders remained closed. Human ships patrolled the boundary of human space, turning away any vessels that approached. Diplomatic missions were refused. Messages went unanswered. Humanity had withdrawn completely, and they showed no interest in returning. A year after the Exodus, the Council formally dissolved the committees that had been formed to manage the human question. There was no point anymore. Humanity was gone and they were not coming back. The galaxy would have to face its future without them. 2 years after the Exodus, Counselor Thexera stood in the empty council chamber on Nexus Prime. The station was operating at 10% capacity, barely able to maintain life support. Most delegates had returned to their homeworlds.